Hello everyone, and welcome back to Warships Blitz with Terry. Today we will be looking at the next role in the series of ship roles and how they match to the tech trees. And today it's the turn of the support cruiser. We've talked about scout cruisers or destroyer leaders last time, but the support cruiser is an interesting role, and it's honestly one of my favorites, but it requires a certain mindset. And I'll go into some details as to what that entails. So what is the role of a support cruiser? A support cruiser is a ship that is there to stay with the team most of the time and to enable the team to win. That is the role of a support cruiser. You're not there to sink most of the enemy ships. You're not there to do the most damage in the game. You're there to enable your team to win by using your ship to its fullest potential. The best example, and the best tech tree line for that is the American light cruiser line. So if we're looking at, say, the Cleveland at tier 8, the Cleveland has good anti-aircraft capabilities, the Cleveland has sonar, and the Cleveland has radar, which means the Cleveland is capable of spotting torpedoes early, the Cleveland is capable of negating smoke, the Cleveland has rapid-firing 150mm guns, and the Cleveland is able to assist friendly ships with deflecting carrier strikes. This doesn't, when I say ships, this doesn't necessarily mean battleships. You don't have to park yourself next to a battleship and then just, sit there. But you can totally play in front of the battle line where you should be. But you shouldn't, in a support cruiser, my rule of thumb is you shouldn't cross the center line of the map until late game. And you can support destroyers early on against airstrikes, but you don't want to rush ahead into the enemy team. Because your strength is with supporting your team. That is the best you can do in this particular role. Now, roles and ship line, tech tree lines don't necessarily match one-to-one. It's like you can have certain tech tree lines that can play multiple roles, right? Just because I'm saying that the American light cruisers are great support cruisers doesn't mean you have to play them as support cruisers. You can play them selfishly if you want to, but you're wasting some of the potential of these ships. The heavy cruisers, to a degree, can do this as well. So if we look at the Des Moines, she also gets a radar. She doesn't get a sonar, she only gets one radar, but she's a great AA cruiser, and the rapid firing, even though they are heavy cruisers, the guns can fire very rapidly, so she can make herself to a degree useful, but less so than the American light cruisers. The British light cruisers, not so much. They are falling much more into the scout cruiser, aggressive cruiser sort of play style that we'll talk about in a different round. But to a lesser degree than the Americans, the Soviet light cruisers can sort of do this as well. Shapayev gets a radar, and while the AA on the Soviet light cruisers is nowhere near as powerful as on the Americans, you don't deflect airstrikes in these things. You can assist a bit. They still the guns on the Soviet light cruisers are very precise and have very flat arcs. So one thing that the Americans light cruisers are suffering from are high shell arcs, which make them very difficult to play at long range, because you're going to have a devil of a time hitting anything that isn't a slow moving battleship. Whereas in the Soviet light cruisers, you can play this sort of deterrence deflection much more from range and support your team that way. And that's about it, honestly. You might be tempted to say that ships like the Haarlem, like the Dutch cruiser line, can work that way. Yes, but no. Yes, in a way that they have the utility, like they have excellent AA, so they work very well as aircraft deflection. The problem is, while they have a sonar, their guns just fire way too slowly, because an 11-second reload isn't going to cut it if you have to play against destroyers. It just takes way too long. So it's really for that role, if you want to play that role, the American light cruisers, and to a somewhat lesser degree, the Soviet heavies, you could argue that the Soviet lights, you could argue that the British heavies kind of can do this in terms of a little bit in AA support, but who wants to play the British heavy cruisers? The line's terrible. And their utility against destroyers, even though you get the sonar on the Goliath, is limited due to the extremely long reload. But at least the AG is pretty good, so there's that. But yeah, the American light cruiser line is sort of where it's at for that kind of role. That's what they absolutely excel in. So what do you do as a support cruiser? Well, your main priorities, like I said, are to make the team win. How do you make the team win? What do you do in order to enable your team to win? You're part of the screening force for your battle line. So deflecting enemy destroyers is and enemy airstrikes is the bread and butter that you do in these ships. You do need to be careful not to play too aggressively and get yourself isolated and exposed, but you can also support your scouting group, your destroyer group, and unless they are rushing ahead right into it. But at the onset of the game, if there's some cover, you can provide air cover for these ships as well. You can do things like distracting targets, because you're a light cruiser, and all the battleships know that light cruisers are damage piñatas for them, because they have relatively light armor, they can be citadeled easily, and battleships have big guns. So distract enemy battleships if you see that a friendly destroyer is sneaking up on them is also something that you can do. You're pretty fast and maneuverable, so clean out, keeping your battle line clean, spotting enemy ships that might have snuck through. Use your radar to negate smokes, use your sonar to spot torpedoes early, and use your defensive AA to provide air cover. And be there for your team, play tactically. You have great visibility capabilities with the radar and the sonar. And you can, in terms of damage dealing, yes, you can also support your team in that regard by just setting fires, triggering damage controls, and then or exploiting scenarios where, say, somebody has flooded, has used the damage control, and then try to set fires and do some damage. It's not that you don't do damage in these ships, but your primary role in a support cruiser role, not necessarily in the tech tree line, but in a support cruiser role, is to enable your team to win as much as you can. Now, of course, you can't always carry the team, but you can do your utmost to make sure that the team has the best possible chance to win. So let's have a look at a game. And I'm going to play the Cleveland, and I'm going to kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So let's begin by looking at the enemy team composition. We are playing a 6v6. There are carriers in play, but they're bot carriers, so they don't pose a big threat. So the air deterrence is not your priority in this game. Why? Because bot carriers can't use torpedo bombers. They can only use dive bombers, and they will target whatever is closest, which means they're not a huge threat to destroyers. And they're not going to scout, so in that regard, we don't need to worry about that. What about the rest of the team? We've got Minnesota and Bismarck. There's a Seattle, which is an improved Cleveland, it's a tier 9 version of us. And there are 3 destroyers. There's a Kagero, a Benson, and another Kagero. So on our team, we have a bot Shokaku, a lone Gascogne as the only battleship, and we have 4 destroyers on the team: a Benham, a Benson, a Xianyang, and a Kagero for our own. So, and we're playing Aurora base capture. So remember, rule of thumb for the early game, center line is where it's at. Don't go any further than that. Stick with your team. But given that the carriers aren't going to scout, I will rely on the friendly destroyers to do the scouting. And make sure that, and Xianyang is radar, I believe, so, and we'll try to protect the Gascogne, because there are 2 battleships on the enemy team versus our 1. I'm switching to armor piercing. Why? Because against destroyers, it's just much more effective. You can use the armor piercing against harder targets if you can target weak spots effectively to maximize your damage. But you'd be surprised how many people fire high explosive at destroyers in these things, or at everything else. Really, the armor piercing on American light cruisers is good. Use it. It's really good. So I'm going to go out a little bit here with the Benson, but I'm not going to go much further than that. I'm just checking where the team is scouting, and I know this map. And there are 3 destroyers. Someone is going to come along the east line. So I'm already more orienting myself towards the center. And the Benson is rushing off on his own and has found the cargo. So let's try to just do some deterrence and just shoot at the cargo and saying, hey, cargo, you've been spotted. You're going to start taking damage. It's not an awful lot because you're not necessarily particularly precise on these things, but shoo him away. Because, as I predicted, 2 destroyers are coming around the eastern side of the map, so I'm going to be needed over there. The Benson is definitely is currently suiciding into a Seattle. Have fun with that. So we're down one. Was it the Benson or was it? Yeah, I think it was the Benson. So the Benson is dead, unless he manages to disengage and do some harassment over there. But I now need to head over to the eastern end of the map and deal with these 2 destroyers. There's a smoke screen, but it's out of my radar range, so no need to use it quite yet. And we're almost in gun range. There's the enemy Benson, and now we can start opening up on this thing. At long range, these guns are not the most precise, and the hang time is extreme. So getting these shells on target if the enemy doesn't stand still is a bit of a trick. So if you think you lead enough, lead more. So I'm shielding currently the Gascoigne, and the Benson is coming in. So instead of turning out and going undetected, the Benson is coming in. I'm not sure if he's noticed me, but he's going to notice me in a second. He now smokes up, so sonar up, and once his smoke's deployed, radar up. Benson's still spotted. I am putting her in reverse just in case he's got torpedoes out, but the sonar should spot them in time, and the Benson is kind of zeroing in on the friendly Kagero. So there are shots coming in from the Gascoigne as well. And to my great surprise, our destroyer is still alive. that went all the way. But let's deal with that Benson while keeping an eye on the minimap, because there's the Kagero. Okay, and my sonar is now down. So we need to be a little bit more careful. But Kagero is way too close. He's a stealth destroyer, and he's made the cardinal error of not being in stealth. So the Gascoigne is shooting at him, which is really unfortunate. I mean, don't waste your shots. I've got this, right? I know that you're afraid of torpedoes, and that's why I'm going nose in towards the Kagero, because my sonar is on cooldown. So now he's running away, but I have spotted the torpedoes early for the Gascoigne to dodge them, and he should be focusing on the enemy battleships, because there's 2 of them, and while our destroyers should be able to deal with that, not always sure. We've just lost our Kagero to the Bismarck. So, and I'm now at the wrong end of the map, so I now need to turn around. But we equal on kills right now. Their 2 destroyers have been cleaned up from the eastern end of the map. That's why I'm here. That's why I didn't rush forward or go down the western side of the map, because I knew that I had to maintain the screen. So the 2 destroyers that we have left, that Benham is in relatively low hit points, are way too aggressive, I believe, at this point. There's still a Seattle out there. There's still a carrier out there. And while the carrier is not going to hurt you much, he's going to keep you spotted, because you're the closest target to the carrier in a destroyer. Benham's got good range, and you're low on hit points. Just go undetected. Run away. Why are you being aggressive? So there is an enemy battleship. So why am I starting to shoot at that battleship? Because that's a Bismarck. And the Bismarck has sonar and all the secondaries. So I'm trying to distract the Bismarck. I'm trying to say, hey, look, light cruiser here, shoot at me. Don't ignore these destroyers right in front of you. But the Bismarck, unfortunately, either knows what he's doing or has completely tunnel visioned in on the destroyer. So there come the torpedoes. Bismarck knew they were coming, has literally stopped, and the torpedoes going up the side. There comes the Xianyang. Xianyang might be able to get... why are you getting into a gunfight with the Bismarck? Do you have torpedoes ready? No, you don't, because you're not using them. So that's a dead Xianyang. And that Bismarck's going to say, thank you for the kill. There comes the cargo. Okay, cargo next. So sonar up, just in case he has... and it looks like our Gascoigne has problems on the other end of the map with the enemy Minnesota, I believe it was. Yeah, there's the Minnesota. So I have to actually drop chasing the cargo and help out with the Minnesota. Yes, because our Gascoigne is on very low hit points. That's why he should have started focusing on the targets that he can actually do something effectively about, the battleships. Now, so he can't deal with the Minnesota because he doesn't have the hit points. So he's getting out of there, but he's now coming under fire from the Bismarck that our Xianyang has suicided into, and that our Benham hasn't managed to sink. So the Minnesota has taken out the bot carrier, and at this point we're 1 kill down, and it's a minute to go. So there's no way I'm actually going to be able to sink the Minnesota. Bismarck predictably has taken out the Gascoigne. So now, what do you do in that kind of situation? We've lost, right? We've tried to enable our team as much as possible. So now all we can do is do as much damage as we can. And yes, obviously, if a battleship starts shooting at you, that's the result, especially at close ranges. We're not going to do an awful lot with fires anymore because we've got 20 seconds left. So I'm switching over to the armor piercing and just maximizing the damage. Maybe I can take the Minnesota down with me, but we've lost anyway. So either way, we've lost. You want to target the bow section. That was a little bit too far back. So we need to lead a little bit more. And just maximize the amount of damage you can do. Yep, that is exactly what happens to light cruisers if battleships get in close range. If I had 10 more seconds, I might have been able to sink the Minnesota, but as it stands, the battle ends. And even if I did, it wouldn't have been enough to win. We might have gotten a draw out of it, but as it stands, that's all we could do. So what should you expect when you are playing support cruiser? Support cruiser is not a glorious role. You're not going to go and do the most damage in the team. You're not going to go and come out on top of the team necessarily. You're not going to always win. But where you need to draw your satisfaction from the support cruiser role is that you've done your utmost to enable your team to win. You've tried to give them all the opportunities that you could possibly give in order to win. And that is why this is probably one of my favorite class of ship to play. Because while it's not rewarding in terms of damage or points or anything, but I find it rewarding in its own right. So if you're interested in that sort of playstyle, American light cruisers, absolutely predestined. To a degree, the American heavy cruisers as well, although they are a bit more aggressive. The Soviet light cruisers, and you can kind of play other cruisers in a little bit similar role. Like you could say, for example, the German heavy cruisers at range with the armor piercing are absolutely devastating against destroyers and light cruisers. You can kind of play, but they all don't have the same balance towards all this strength with radar and sonar and rapid firing guns and defensive AA and great air power and decent armor and maneuverability and all these kind of things. The American light cruisers really shine there, so that's the line you should go. Don't be discouraged by the Dallas. The Dallas is dreadful. Just get across the Dallas. The Brooklyn's already better. The Cleveland's amazing. I know not everybody likes these ships, especially in higher tiers, but the Cleveland is, I think, a really, really solid tier 8 support cruiser, and I'm still enjoying the Seattle profoundly, and I'm probably going to enjoy the Worcester quite a bit as well. So just play them to their strength, right? Don't try to broadside brawl battleships. You've seen what happens if you do. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.